General Motors says it's closing several plants in the United States Rust Belt and laying off a whopping 15% of salaried employees as well. What are the political implications for Donald Trump and those who intend to run against him in 2020? Let's turn to our political panel to discuss it. They're David Brown, Democratic strategist. He served as majority counsel to Democratic Senator Patty Murray on 2 congressional committees. He's in San Francisco. And in New York City, Jen Kerns, GOP strategist, former spokesperson for the California Republican Party. David, politically, what are these General Motors closings going to mean?
Well, Laurie, it's not good news for the president. If you recall, he ran on creating jobs. He ran on saying that he would ensure jobs come back to the United States as opposed to leaving the United States. And in fact, he campaigned in Ohio with that very message and famously announced the return of jobs shortly after he was elected. And so for the president, Ohio being a must-win battleground state, this can't be good news. And I think it's also pretty striking that, when you look at exit polls from the midterms, a lot of voters voted really on the president. That was what they were voting about. He was really the referendum. And even for voters who like the direction the economy is heading, they may not like the president personally. So for this kind of news to be announced, I think there are very significant political implications, including, of course, former Governor Kasich, who is eyeing a potential independent bid to challenge the president from the center.
Jen, what do you make of it?
Well, I agree, Larry, with what David just said. The headline is not good, but if you read a bit beyond that, there are some unique bits of information here as to the closing. GM has long since been looking to trim some of the fat around their white-collar workers, many of whom will be affected by this. This isn't necessarily the guys on the line in the factory that are getting laid off. A big portion of this, about 40%, are the white-collar middle management workers that have been needed to be weeded out for some time. And those are different than the type of worker that Trump has been marketing to in the Rust Belt. You also look at other factors at play here. There has been a move to crossover vehicles, electric cars, and even some of these autonomous, these Google driving cars that the market is turning toward. And GM, I think, is simply responding to a market need there. As for the state of Ohio, this is a state that has voted for the president, with the exception of, I think, Grover Cleveland, JFK, and FDR. Donald Trump is still doing quite well in the state of Ohio. Just look at the governor's race there. They had a number of polls in this summer saying, oh gosh, Republicans are going to lose the governorship there. That turned out not to be the case. They had the Democrat there up about 43% to 36%. That turned out not to be the case. So a governorship in Ohio is a very good stance on how the voters feel about the president going into 2020.
David, speaking of Ohio, Sherrod Brown, the Democratic Ohio senator, he held on to his seat. You think he's going to challenge? Do you think he's going to go for the nomination?
Well, I think it's certainly a possibility, and I think we saw Senator Brown really begin to preview what his campaign might sound like and look like over the weekend and the past week. And you're right, Larry. I mean, he won a resounding re-election for a third term to the U.S. Senate at a time when, as Jen pointed out, the governor and other races in Ohio did go for Republicans. And I think what's really striking about Senator Brown, I've been in the room with the man, and what you see is what you get. And I mean that as a compliment. He's an authentic person. He's a leader. He happens to be a politician, but he's a leader. And he's really found a way, I think, to connect with workers who feel in many respects like this economy is leaving them behind. And the senator talks a lot about the dignity of work, and I think that's a message that's particularly powerful and resonant in Ohio. And Jen noted a lot of the jobs that are disappearing from Ohio with the GM announcement being white-collar jobs. She also commented about autonomous work and sort of the future of work, and I think that's really where Senator Brown is focused. He's focused on how do we ensure that for generations of Americans who have been perhaps on a factory line and feel like the economy is leaving them behind, how do we ensure that they still have dignity of work and they are able to provide for their families? And so I suspect that the senator does run. He's going to run really focused on the middle class and on ensuring that middle class workers and their families still have access to the American dream. So I hope that he does run.
Jen, what do you make of the tumult at the U.S.-Mexican border, tear gas being forced into the faces of people trying to get into the country, border protection temporarily halted, crossing in both directions. What are the political, certainly not a good sight to see. What are the political implications, Jen?
No, you're right, Larry. It's not a good sight to see. And as somebody who lived in San Diego for the better part of 10 years, it's very upsetting to see this happening so close to, some of my friends and family who live and work in the area. But I have to tell you, Larry, I think this backfires on the Democrats or whomever is behind encouraging the caravan to come across, because many Americans saw with their naked eyes yesterday the storming of the gates, people trying to crash the gates to get into the United States. And I think the administration is taking a heavy hand here because they want to send a signal, no more caravans.
David, what do you make of it?
Well, I don't think comments such as what we just heard from Jen are particularly helpful in moving this debate forward. First of all, Democrats are not encouraging the caravan or any caravan to come to the US.
They sure are. In fact, there's a
finish,
Politico report.
Jen, I didn't interrupt you. Let me finish.
There's a Politico report that says a top Democrat strategist in California, his name is Dan Newman,
Jen, San Francisco,
let me finish. Is down there assisting the caravan.
Jen, let him finish.
Come on. I mean, first of all, this is an issue that people who are acting in good faith need to come to the table and negotiate. And that means Democrats in the House and the Senate and Republicans in the House and the Senate need to come together so we actually have a chance at a real immigration reform, bipartisan immigration reform. We did it when I was serving in the Senate in 2013. You saw Democrats and Republicans come together. They compromised. It was hard, but they got there, and unfortunately didn't pass the House, and that's why we are where we are. But the president's frustrated because he wants to do things at the border that he can't do under current law, and you saw that with the injunction that was issued last week, a temporary restraining order by a federal judge, preventing the president from unilaterally changing the rules of how people can petition for asylum. And that's because there's a federal law that governs that. That's the Immigration and Naturalization Act. So the executive right now is hamstrung by current law. And so really the only way we're going to actually move forward on this issue, Larry, is with a political compromise that requires Democrats and Republicans in Congress working together along with the president. And I would also say, I don't think that border security is mutually exclusive with a humane immigration policy. And so the idea that we would celebrate, and there were Republicans doing this on Twitter this weekend, celebrate images of tear gas being launched against children and women and families, I find that repugnant. I think it's contrary to American values. But let's just be really clear and cut through the political rhetoric on this. You can have strong border security and also have a humane and responsible immigration policy. That's the direction we need to move as a country.
Jen?
And that's exactly what President Trump proposed. Speaking of bipartisan compromises, it was Chuck and Nancy who went to have dinner with Trump, emerged from that saying they had a deal on DACA. Well, whatever happened to that deal? President Trump had a live on TV, kind of odd, but had a cabinet meeting, a bipartisan cabinet meeting where he invited his cabinet and Chuck and Nancy into the room. And he said, quote, "I will sign any bill on DACA that you bring to my desk." And they failed to do it. They failed to reach a compromise. And look, in terms of the humanity of this, look at the 100,000 cases that have come in just in this last year alone. How many more are Americans supposed to take in? How many people are we supposed to take in if they don't come through our points of entry? In terms of the legal case you just mentioned, that went straight to the Ninth Circuit. And there's a reason that the Ninth Circuit has earned the nickname the Ninth Circus. And that is, it is stacked with Obama judges, even if Justice Roberts wants to disagree. The political reality is judges are appointed by politicians. Therefore, you can't pretend that judges aren't part of the political process somewhere along the line. They certainly do represent the political philosophies of the politicians.
Jen, on the United States Supreme Court, you would call them Trump judges.
Well, sure. Just as I would call, Kagan and Ruth Bader Ginsburg Democrat judges. Sure.
Jen, you're not a lawyer, are you? I suspect, given what you just said, you're not a lawyer. I got to tell you, as a lawyer,
thank God.
I find the president's.
I'm a real human being.
I find the president's rhetoric on this to be very dangerous. And I got to tell you, I thought it was unfortunate that the Chief Justice felt compelled to step in the way he did, but I'm glad he did, because the reality is, when a judge is confirmed by the United States Senate, he or she becomes a judge. They're not an Obama judge. They're not a Trump judge. They're not a Bush judge. They're not a Reagan judge. They're judges. And for the judiciary to work as a co-equal branch of government, the American people have to understand and believe in the fact that the judiciary can be impartial. Now, you may take exception to the Ninth Circuit's set of rulings, and in fact, that they are overturned, perhaps with greater frequency.
In fact,
Jen,
I've
again,
actually,
could I
David,
just
I've
finish,
actually
please?
had.
Could I finish, please?
I've actually had a campaign that went to the Ninth Circuit and got overturned. And look, the running joke in Sacramento is that the Ninth Circuit is the third house of the California legislature. It rubber stamps every liberal policy and proposal that comes out of the legislature. And this is why they have one of the highest overturn rates in the country, about 80%. About 60% of their decisions are overturned at the Supreme Court, and about 20% are vacated, which is in essence the same thing. And again, I go back to the point, it's naive to say that judges aren't Obama judges or Trump judges. They are political appointees, and therefore they are appointed in the image, the political image of the politician that
Jen,
appoints
what do
them.
you
And
think?
to suggest
What do you think the
otherwise is
president's
naive.
goal? What do you think the president's goal is when he calls a judge an Obama judge, or when he attacks a judge on the basis of his national origin or ethnicity, that Mexican judge? What do you think the president's trying to do when he uses that kind of rhetoric? I mean, I think it's a pretty obvious answer. He's trying to undermine the integrity of those judicial decisions because he doesn't like the outcome. My answer to that is make a better argument. Have better lawyers.
Well, my
Make
answer
a better
to that
case,
is
Jen.
the
Or by the
United
way, Jen,
States-
actually try to do something on immigration aside from rhetoric. And by the way, the reason that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer weren't able to get a deal on DACA done, it's because Paul Ryan wasn't able to move the key voting bloc in his caucus on the far right that is so out of touch with mainstream America on this issue. That's why that deal fell apart. So I think if we want to be fair and transparent with viewers on this issue, you need to make sure the entire story is covered.
Jen, do you think now Trump suggests that if he doesn't get a border wall, he may shut down the government when the funding deadline comes up in December? Honestly, Jen, do you think he's ever going to get a wall? And do you think Mexico's going to pay for it?
Well, look, Mexico has already come to the table to help out in the migrant situation, which people thought would never happen. Never underestimate Donald Trump. He is the master of the art of the deal. If you had said a year ago that the government of Mexico would be helping us on holding some of these migrant caravans back, people would have laughed and said it will never happen.
You think he'll
and
get
it's
a
happening.
wall?
I think he'll get most of what he wants. I don't know if it'll be by the December 7th deadline, but I do think Donald Trump will get most of what he wants, which is either a wall or at least some beefed up security and fence structures, other things. As he said, it might not be the complete wall, but it'll be awfully close to it. And look, I think what the American people saw yesterday, people streaming over our fences, crashing through the gates, I think does not help. As someone who has consulted on TV ads, that's a ready-made TV ad for a border wall.
Those people were not criminals.
Well, look, Larry, if someone's trying to break into your home, are they a criminal? Yes. And if people are trying to break into our country, they're not supposed to legally be here.
They're seeking asylum.
In essence, by the definition, they are committing a crime.
Larry, what Jen's saying is incorrect under current law. Under the INA, a migrant can enter into the United States and petition for asylum, whether or not he or she is passing through a border. No, in fact, no. That is not what the statute says. That is incorrect. That is factually incorrect. You can read the public law yourself.
At the proper port of entry.
It is
Look
no.
at Kirsten Nielsen. She has gone over this ad nauseum with Democrats.
Incorrect, and that is the basis.
Port of entry.
That is the basis for the temporary restraining order that was issued last week. That is factually incorrect.
By an Obama judge in the Ninth Circuit.
Well,
see, I would guarantee.
I'm sorry, Jen. The INA, Jen, the INA was passed by the United States Congress a number of years ago by Republicans and Democrats. The judge was interpreting the plain language of the statute. It's quoted. You can read it verbatim. You can't get away from this one. The administration was in error in what it was trying to do.
Larry, I would be willing to bet we'll be back here in a month talking about how that decision was overturned at the higher court, as most of the decisions of the Ninth Circuit are.
So that would be overturned by a Trump court.
Well,
okay,
true.
Well, all right. We're running out of time. Alan Dershowitz, who's a Trump defender on these, says that Robert Mueller's eventual report on the Russia investigation will politically devastate the president. What do you make of that, David?
Well, look, I'm not going to prognosticate on what the report may or may not say. What I do know is that to date, the special counsel and his team have secured, I think, a combination of 32 indictments and/or guilty pleas from individuals, along with 3 companies. And so I think clearly they have been very methodical and judicious in how they've gone about the work that they're doing. And I suspect that there is going to be damaging information in that report. I think what Dershowitz was saying, he doesn't think it's going to rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors such that there would be potential threshold met for impeachment. But that doesn't mean that the report won't be politically damaging. I think it's also very significant that you have Republicans like Senator Flake in the U.S. Senate from Arizona, along with Democrats, all of whom are concerned that the special counsel isn't protected, and the fact that the president has appointed an acting AG who has made comments really skeptical about the legitimacy of the investigation. It's critical that Mueller be allowed to finish his work, and the American people have access to that report. That's what I'm very concerned about, Larry. I'm concerned that a report's going to be issued. It's going to go to the acting AG, and then the administration is going to choose not to release it in full, either to the Congress or to, and most importantly, to the American people. I think we have a right to read that report, and I think we have a right to hold the president and his team accountable on the basis of what that report says.
Jen,
and by the
honestly,
way, if it's exculpatory, then it's exculpatory, but I think we have a right to see the report.
Jen, honestly, are you concerned?
Well, first of all, as David said there, that's actually not correct. Whitaker has actually assured Senator Lindsey Graham, as well as other members of Congress, that he would not seek to dismiss the Mueller investigation. And by the way, the public opinion on this is pretty clear. Nearly 2/3 of Americans would actually vote against a proposed congressional bill this year that would prevent Donald Trump from firing Mueller. So the American people are actually on Trump's side in this case. But look, I agree. There's a political reality here. I often say the court of public opinion sometimes is more important than the actual court. And it depends on what the report says. I predict there will be no evidence of Russia collusion, but there might be some problems here for Donald Trump in terms of maybe drafting that press statement regarding the meeting of his son in Trump Tower. We'll have to see what that comes out to be. But I think that's going to be the extent of it, Larry, but we'll see.
Jen, David, thank you both very much for a very enlightening portion of this edition of PoliticKing. Thank you both for coming.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.